Have you had an encounter with Mr. Tall, Dark, and Scary, or Mrs. Tall, Dark, and Scary, and you'd like to hear your experience narrated on this channel? Well, we want to hear it too, so go on, send us an email with all the details. You can send your email to contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Hey there, everyone. Welcome or welcome back. Now listen, tonight's story is not fiction, though it was sent in by Ophelia, who has written some fun fiction for us a few months ago, especially during Squatchmas. But tonight, Ophelia has sent us a story that a friend related to her that happened up in the dark woods in Maine. So get your snackage, get your booty on up in the saddle, because we're heading up into Maine's very own Sasquatch Valley. Are you ready? Yeah, me too. Let's go. Hello, Nance and Sasquatch. I am so excited. I couldn't wait to share with you. So some of you might remember that I mentioned in my very first letter that I personally had never encountered a Bigfoot, nor had I ever talked to anyone who had. Not once had anyone ever mentioned the subject. Not ever. But then again, neither had I. As it turns out, I just needed to ask the right people the right questions. I live just on the cusp between the lower part of Maine, where the majority of the people are, and where things start to get pretty rural. Most people would consider my area rural, with a population of 2,000 and large swaths of wooded area taking up most of the town. But compared to everything north of me, I am in a downright cosmopolitan area. By rural, I mean a population of less than 400, and it's a half-hour drive to get to the nearest mom-and-pop shop, and it's much further to get to places like hospitals and department stores. The friend I spoke to lives about an hour north of me. They are on the cusp of the rural area and hundreds of square miles of nothing but wilderness. The forests are not at all like the Pacific Northwest. Everything is more, closed in. That's the best way I can explain it. The sheer density of the woods means that when you are in them, you are surrounded by an impenetrable screen of vegetation. Well, during the summer anyway. There are a lot of places where you can't see what might be hiding 10 feet away. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen it. I grew up in this world, and it still boggles my mind. The winter becomes a whole new landscape, but I try to make it a point to avoid the remote wilderness during the winters, so I have less to draw on to be able to paint a vivid picture as to what that is like, and I'm very happy to keep it that way. The thing about Maine is 90% of the population is condensed in about 20 to 25% of the land, and the rest is a vast expanse of wilderness, which seems like it would be prime Bigfoot habitat. And maybe it is. Maybe there is so much forest they can stay hidden easily. But I always wondered if maybe there wasn't another reason for the low numbers of Sasquatch sightings. Maybe what my friend saw is part of the answer. Because he didn't see a Bigfoot. I have my own suspicion as to what it was, but I will leave the guesses up to the Sasquatch. I wrote it up as a story, but aside from the dialogue not being verbatim, the events are 100% as they happened. I grilled him over and over to make sure I had all the details right. I now have a new theory as to why I haven't personally heard of any Bigfoot before this. Maine is a very interesting place, and the people are definitely guarded. We tend not to talk about certain things, unless we are with people we know and trust. It also seems like everyone has a story about something strange that happened. I got interested in cryptids after I went down the rabbit hole, looking for answers for my own really strange events I have seen and experienced. Things that made me question reality and my own sanity. It seems that most people around here have, at some point in their lives, seen something they can't explain. But in these parts, people just tend to compartmentalize these events as just something odd that happened, and they just leave it at that, because dwelling on it will likely drive a person crazy, So the best thing to do is not think about it too much. Although my friend has another friend whose experience was so traumatic he sought mental health help, and I mean, isn't that what any sane person would do after having an up-close interaction with something impossible? But he went from being an avid outdoorsman to refusing to step into the forest at all, and is constantly nagging his friends with a single-minded intensity to be safe and stay out of certain parts of the woods altogether. I'm working on getting the details of that story. From the little bit that I heard, it's going to be a jaw-dropper. But I want to be respectful of how catastrophic his encounter was to his life. Perhaps getting his story out there and hearing from others who know he's not crazy will encourage him to share all the details. We will see. He has agreed to discuss it with me, and you all will be the first to know if I am successful. Of course, that story is far more dramatic than usual, and most people just shrug off their experience and move on. They don't bring it up because they don't dwell on it. They don't want people to think they're crazy, and unless the subject is specifically addressed, it wouldn't even occur to them to say anything. So now that I know what questions to ask, I am discovering a whole new side to my state. Even after I mentioned I had written some stories for a cryptid channel, my friends, well, they had no idea what I was talking about. Of course, they had heard of Bigfoot, skinwalkers, Yeti, and such. But to them, those were just stories, creepypasta stuff, and it had nothing to do with their free lives, so they never paid it much attention. Even after I explained what cryptids were, my friend, we'll call him Space, well, Space still didn't make the connection. I asked them if they had ever heard any stories about Bigfoot or any other strange creature, and Space said no. But he did have something really strange happen in the woods with a deer or something. Space, well, his real name is Robert T. He was happy to share his full name, but I cautioned against putting all of that information on the internet. Space said he wanted to put his name on it so everyone would know that all the details were exactly as they happened. He puts high value on his name, reputation, and his word. He said he didn't want to hide behind an alias, and he wanted to be as transparent as possible so people would know he is telling the truth. He made no conclusions as to what he saw, just that he saw something strange. He gave me just the facts with no commentary as to what he thought it was. And holy moly, it is one heck of an account. I did change his friend's name because we weren't able to get permission to use it, so I am using an alias for the other person involved. I wrote it up in story format, but aside from the precise dialogue, the events are as they were explained to me by Space. He doesn't think the whole thing was that big of a deal. It was odd, weird, and strange, but certainly nothing that would ever happen again, and perhaps to everyone listening, this encounter, well, might be average at best. But having it happen in my own backyard to someone I know has really brought the whole subject home. It was the end of March 2015. It had been a mild Maine winter, but soggy. The snow was mostly gone with the recent rain, but the world was still locked in its dormant state, and the woods were just a soft blur of dead vegetation and leafless trees. A few evergreens were the only thing with any life to it in the woods. Everything seemed to be wrapped in a cloak of grayish-brown, interrupted by the stark, dark tree trunks everywhere you looked. Space and Trent were restless. Snowmobiling and ice fishing were over for the year, and it was too early for four-wheeling and camping. They were bored and wanted some excitement. After going down the rabbit hole online, they found a story about an old fallout bunker just past the Old Town Elementary School. The place was said to be abandoned, and people posted photos of their explorations of the place. It had been built in 1965, during the height of the Cold War. but it became obsolete. It was then used as an overflow for the women's prison until it was abandoned and fell into ruin. Now it was a local hotspot for those looking for some urban exploration. Someone had posted a hand-drawn map, and the directions seemed pretty straightforward. The teenagers decided it was just the kind of thing to cure their cabin fever. They found the trail quickly, just past the grade school, down the path. They had the map that they had found online and a flashlight, as it was now fully dark. Well, because any clandestine adventure is done at night, and they didn't want to break tradition. "Dude, it's really cold out," Trent grumbled, "and it's starting to rain." Space pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up over his head. "It's just a little drizzle. Don't be such a wussy. Come on, it's not far." The trail was narrow and overgrown. Space knew there must have been a road here at some point, but it was hard to see. The woods had reclaimed the land after the bunker was abandoned, and now, in the dark with a cheap flashlight he kept in the glove box for emergencies, he was having a hard time staying on the path. They might be close to town, but if they walked in the wrong direction and got lost, they could end up in a bad survival situation really quick. But he had spent countless hours in the woods, and he knew the best way to stay oriented was to pick a landmark and use it as a guide to orient oneself, so he wasn't too concerned with losing their way. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Trent's eyes darted around the woods. There was nothing but the bare tree trunks for as far as they could see in the dim light. "We should have reached the entrance by now." Trent tried not to sound afraid, but Space knew he was getting uneasy. "Chill," Space said. "We must be getting close." A few more steps and they could see a sign up ahead. They pointed the flashlight at it, and they could see the "No Trespassing" sign. This must be it. Trent sounded more confident, but Space frowned. "I didn't read anything about any posted "No Trespassing" signs." Space was up for adventure, but he was planning on joining the military just as soon as they would take him, and he had no interest in ruining his life with a criminal record. "We are supposed to turn down another path before we get there, so I'm not sure this is the right place." Cautiously, they went a few more feet. They could see the woods thin out up ahead, and they could just make out an old pickup truck and a fence with several more "No Trespassing, Keep Out" signs on it. Space?" Trent said. "Yeah, man, I see it too. We are definitely in the wrong spot," Space answered. Space didn't like the feel of the place. It was never a good idea to walk up on someone's property in the middle of the woods. But this place, it just gave him the creeps, and the idea of stumbling onto an illegal growing operation or a meth lab, that was one of the few things he was really afraid of. Those were not the kind of people he wished to piss off. He didn't see any signs of life, but clearly they weren't wanted in this area, and he was all too happy to get some distance between them and that creepy place. He might have wanted an adventure, but not the kind that ended up with someone shooting at him. Without further discussion, the two teens did an about-face and hurried back down the trail. After speed-walking for a minute or two, they slowed down, and Space pulled out the map. "It's cold. The flashlight sucks, and we don't know where we're going. Let's just head back to your place and play some Fortnite." Trent said that, starting to sound almost panicked. Space hated seeing his friend scared, but he also knew that Trent would never get out of the house and experience the world if Space didn't coax him into it. He was anxious to do some exploring, and he really wanted to see the old bunker. The pictures online promised excitement. Space had a curious mind and a sharp intellect, and he wanted to go experience things for himself instead of living life through a computer screen. "Come on, Trent. We're close, and what is there to be afraid of?" "What? You're scared of getting attacked by a raccoon?" Trent called Space a rude name. "Whatever, man. I'm going back," he said. Well, Space said, I am going to keep going, and I have the map and the flashlight, but you can head back if you want. Another stream of curse words came from Trent, but he fell into step behind Space. Look, there it is! Space shone the light on the side of the trail where there was an old board nailed to a tree that read, Bunker, written in Sharpie. They could just make out a narrow path beside it. See, I told ya. Space grinned back at his friend. Yeah, okay, you were right. Okay, let's find the bunker and then go home. They walked on in silence for another few moments when Space heard Trent hiss from behind him. Dude, do you hear that? What the heck is that? Space stopped, ready to scold his friend for jumping at shadows, when he heard a noise coming from behind them on the trail. It sounded like something walking. He could hear the dry rustle of the leaves and the subtle squelch of the mud. They stood in silence, and the two teens could clearly hear footsteps, and they were close. Space spun around and pointed his flashlight into the trees. About 20 feet away, there was a shadow crouched down on the trail. What is that? Trent was starting to panic, but Space only felt curious. There was nothing in the Maine woods that worried him. He felt that two grown adult, or close enough anyway, men could handle anything that might be out there. He started to edge toward the shadow to get a better look. I think it's a deer. He spoke more to himself than to Trent as he squinted, trying to peer into the darkness. Dude, deer don't stalk people, Trent pointed out. And the shadow was clearly stalking them. As he took a few steps toward it, he could see the creature that was low on all fours with its hind end higher than its shoulders, much like a cat when about to pounce. It had brown fur and a snout. Its ears were laid back on its head, and Space couldn't quite make out what shape they were, but he suspected he was wrong. It was not a deer. It must be a bear. He didn't know when bears came out of hibernation, but what else could it be? Deer didn't stalk humans. They didn't act like house cats about to pounce. In fact, if a deer or any prey animal encountered a human in the woods, they would simply go the other way, not creep down the path behind them like they were about to be dinner. We need to go. Trent now had stepped in close behind Space, and his voice was shaking, and Space could see his body was tensed, like he was about to flee. Do not run. Space's voice was sharp. If it was a bear just coming out of hibernation, it would be hungry, and it might forget that it was supposed to be afraid of humans. And it would explain why the shadow wasn't bear-shaped. If it was starving, that must be why it looked so skinny. Space tried to remember what he knew about bears. He had only seen one once in the wild, and it had been from a great distance. He had seen most other critters that lived in the Maine woods, though, including a white minx he mistook for someone's pet ferret, and he spent the better part of a day trying to catch it, thinking it was a domestic animal that needed rescue rather than a wild animal. But that had been when he was young, and Space knew all the creatures that were out there, and this didn't match any of them. But it had to be a bear, because it couldn't be anything else. Maine only has black bears, and he knew the best thing to do was to make yourself look as large as possible and make a lot of noise. Space launched himself forward a step and threw his arms over his head. He channeled his inner caveman as he let out the loudest, fiercest scream he could manage. The shadow froze for a split second. Then it unfolded itself as it stood upright on two legs. Space couldn't believe his eyes as it rose and drew itself up to its full height. The creature had been bunched up and intentionally making itself small. Now fully standing, it towered over them, and the two teens could see how enormous the thing was. Most of its mass was in the chest and arms. Its middle was cinched in like a starving dog. Bulky haunches tapered into scrawny legs. It had continued to rise up well past what space thought it should, and then it kept going until it reached a full 7 feet, possibly more. The creature turned to flee, but paused just long enough to shoot the 2 teens a look of pure malice over its shoulder. Space caught a flash of silvery eyeshine just as it turned and ran. The bare branches of the trees allowed the pair to watch it run off down the trail for a long beat before it vanished in the dark. It remained on 2 feet as it darted impossibly fast into the darkness. At first the friends stood in stunned silence. Then all they could manage was a stream of curse words before lapsing back into silence. Finally, Trent ventured, "Can we go now?" This time, Space was in full agreement, his taste for adventure having been more than satisfied. "Yeah," Space muttered. "Yeah, let's go play some Fortnite." When Space told me this story, he still called it a deer, even though he said several times it did not move like a deer at all. I asked him why he thought it was a deer then, and he explained that it was because it had the nose of a deer, except it was less like a deer or horse because it was shorter and shaped slightly differently, but that was as close as he could explain it. The ears were laid back like animals do when they're hunting or stressed, so he couldn't say much about their shape. The thing was tall, over 7 feet he estimated, and it moved impossibly fast. That's the thing that he kept mentioning, and he would shake his head with disbelief. He would say, "It was just so fast, faster than anything I have ever seen or heard about. Nothing should be able to move that fast. I had never seen anything like it." He just kept saying that. The upper body was disproportionately large with a very skinny middle. He said it was like there was almost a void between its torso and legs. Not that he was implying those 2 things were totally separate, just that it narrowed so much in the middle it looked incredibly strange for any creature. Large chest and arms, but not jacked like a bodybuilder, just big. He either didn't see a tail or doesn't remember seeing one. At first he was seeing it head on, and then after it stood up, he was so stunned that it ran away on 2 feet, he really wasn't noticing anything else. He said the best comparison to how its legs were shaped when standing was like a kangaroo, like how they look when they stand up to their full height. When it was on all fours, it seemed like its back legs were longer than the front legs because its hind end was taller than the front. But then again, it could have been from the stalking position. He wasn't sure. After it stood up, its front legs or arms were drawn up and held in close to its body. Think Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons. He doesn't remember the eyeshine having any color beyond the silvery glint, like a house cat or dog. The thing that he is sure about is that it was really big and really fast, and it ran away on 2 legs. It wasn't just a few steps. It remained on 2 legs the whole time as they watched it run off, and at that time of year you can see quite a distance, even in the deep woods. Even though it covered quite a bit of ground, it did so in an instant, and then it was just gone into the darkness, he assumed. It struck me that there were so many interesting details that I have heard in other encounters, like its size and its speed. The other interesting thing is how close this was to Palmyra, the location of arguably the most famous Dogman case, and I have noticed a growing amount of Dogman accounts coming from that precise location. Also, it's an open secret that there is a hidden military base out in the Maine woods. I have heard plenty enough to know 100% it is out there. I have been told too many stories from too many credible sources to doubt it. It's just that no one knows exactly where it is, so I can't say if it was close to where they were or not. Maine is a big state. Skinwalkers, those are a Southwest thing, but Wendigos, those are of this region. but it had no antlers, no skull face. Personally, I'm not convinced there are any left, or at least they aren't something that anyone has to worry about. And if they are real, only people who have participated in cannibalism should be worried about them. Well, at least according to Native American lore, that is. Space and I both agree it was not a deer, as it had none of the reported traits, and it didn't fit other than a vague deer shape that wasn't that much like a deer. But these are just my musings, so they are no more or less valid than anyone else's thoughts. The really interesting part is that Space had never heard of Dogman or Wendigo before, yet the details are so very familiar. I brought up the subject, and moments later he told me a vivid and detailed account. As sharp as he is, there is no way he made that up on the fly. I questioned him a few more times over the next week, and every detail stayed the same. Every question was met with immediate and detailed answers. He was obviously remembering and not inventing. I have no doubt his account is very much exactly the way it happened. Be safe out there, everyone. I believe that if Trent hadn't heard the footsteps, and if Space hadn't turned around to confront what was there, I believe they could have ended up as two more young men who went out one day and never came back. Now that I know the right questions to ask, I am anxious to find out if there are more stories to be had from my area. I couldn't wait to share this one with the Sasquatch. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the comments, and Space said he would be happy to answer them. And anyone who is interested can search out Abandoned Bunker, Old Town, Maine, and you will find pictures of the bunker. All right, thanks, Ophelia, for bringing us that story. And I think you're right. Perhaps if they hadn't been aware of it, and if they hadn't let it know that they were aware of it, things just might have ended up very differently. Thankfully, they walked away. And listen, Ophelia, if you do get more local stories, please send them in. We do love hearing them. And that goes for everyone listening. Part of the whole goal of this channel is to capture a lot of untold stories. That's how it started. Let's keep it going. So if you know that someone might have had an experience, try to get the details, send it in. All right, listen, I don't have much more to say. I do want to mention, though, that this coming Tuesday, there's going to be a follow-up from the last Tuesday's submitter. That is Victor. Victor wrote in to tell us about meeting a Bigfoot who eventually told him his name, and they shared some fish one day. Now, he said there was more to the story, and everyone went crazy and asked him to send it in, and he already has. I just haven't had time to go through it and get it ready for production, but that will be coming out on Tuesday. So be sure to look for it. He also answers some of the questions that people had about his dad and all of that stuff. So be sure to be on the lookout for that on Tuesday. All right, my Sasquatch, I think that's going to do it for tonight. Please stay warm. I don't know about everyone else, but here in the Ohio Valley, we're about to head into some seriously Arctic temperatures. I think I was hearing 20 and 30 below zero. I hear all kinds of wild reports now. So anyway, stay warm wherever you are, or if you're in a hot location like some of you down under, stay cool, my friend. Anyway, this journey into Sasquatch Valley was a good one tonight, and it was made better with your company. Thank you so much. Until we meet up again for another night down into the valley, please always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.